I think people need to understand that the food industry are there to sell food. They're not there to look after your health. They will do anything and everything they can to promote and convince you to buy products that are going to be detrimental to your health. In my view, they are in essence killing for profit.
We have to remember that the food industry, their primary focus is making profits. They are not invested in our health and well-being.
Claudia, say hi.
That's Claude.
Let's rewind. I was born with celiac disease, a condition where your immune system attacks your own tissues when you eat gluten. These days, it feels as if everyone is allergic to something, but when I was 2 years old, it took 6 doctors to work it out, because it simply wasn't that common. But today, 8.5 million people in the UK have gone gluten-free. This is just one of the many gut disorders that has skyrocketed. IBS, which stands for irritable bowel syndrome, and used as a blanket term for many gut problems, currently affects 20% of the population. In 2018, I was diagnosed with SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. SIBO and IBS cause many distressing symptoms, such as chronic fatigue, bloating, and constipation. I started doing some research and realised that millions of people across the country were suffering with the same symptoms. And the Department of Gastroenterology found that 80% of IBS cases might in fact be connected to SIBO. Gut bacteria is only recently beginning to be seen as a crucial element to our health, and not enough is understood, which is why I went online. And that's when I realised that this gut health epidemic is out of control. Whether it was IBS, SIBO, or another gut problem, something wasn't right. Everyone is so ill, but why?
Food intolerances and allergies and diseases which were previously uncommon that are now becoming very widespread are acting as wake-up calls. Some of these consequences must be connected with the industrialization of farming and the contamination and the adulteration of the foods that they normally eat.
And after the war, we kept right on. Farming was getting to be big business, and we went in for expansion.
From the end of the Second World War, farming became increasingly industrialised. The development of machinery and increase in pesticide use meant that farmers were able to increase yields, but at what cost?
We've got to grow more beans, more tomatoes, more onions, more of all kinds of vegetables and fruits.
Britain developed a cheap food mantra, where the obsession turned to how cheaply can we produce the most amount of food. But what does this mean for the quality of our food?
The biggest problem with the current food system is that we have sacrificed too much on the altar of cheap food. And we're paying such a high price for that in terms of the climate, in terms of nature, in terms of our own health.
As farmers, we're really good at being efficient and producing food cheaply. But it's cheap for a reason. There's something that always has to pay, whether it's the life of the farmer or the conditions of the animals or the condition of the soil. We need to start looking at what we're producing, what we're consuming, and actually realise that quality is far better than quantity. And the density of the nutrients are different. If a farmer is pushed to produce bulk rather than quality, which quite a lot are, and their quality of the meat based on cereals and high starch diets isn't going to be as nutrient dense. So you need more of it to have the same effect. We've pretty much, I think, come to our limit of how cheap we can produce food. We were told for years, just tighten your belts, economize, get rid of all the dead wood.
One of the ways in which industrial farming is impacting our gut health is through the health of the soil.
And the fascinating thing is that the science is only now catching up with why that matters. We have failed to understand the billion microbes in every teaspoon of soil. And the fascinating science of the gut microbiome is now making that connection from health through food right back down to the soil microbiome, showing that what matters for our health is this diverse range of fresh, minimally processed food, preferably with some soil still on it. But we've lost that rich nutritional diversity and the health-giving properties of the soil in our push for ever cheaper food.
I discovered two contrasting farms in Wiltshire. One intensively farmed, and the other grazed naturally. The quality of the soil between the two is very pronounced.
Our health is critically dependent on the health and vitality of the plants and animal products that we eat, and in turn, that health of plant and animal foods is dependent on the health of the soil. What happens when you start to use nitrogen fertilizer is that you damage the health of the fungal organisms which inhabit the soil. If you add insult to that injury by spraying them with herbicides, pesticides and fungicides, clues in the name, these are poisons, they further poison the soil organism. Not only does that make the digestive system of the plant inoperative, if you compromise that digestive process in the plant, then you're going to change the nutrient composition of the plant itself. And downstream, there are going to be consequences for plant diseases, for animal diseases, in the end for human health.
But when you look at the soil is dead. There is no life in that soil. Majority of farmers around us are old people, and they're telling us that when I was a boy, everything grew on our fields without chemicals and there were worms in the soil. There was life in the soil. Now, if I don't put chemicals on my land, nothing will grow on that soil at all. And when chemical industry, petroleum industry, decided that the chemicals that they've invented for Hitler's concentration camps to kill people are now need new market. So they repurposed all those chemicals for agriculture.
I don't know how it's taken everyone this long to realise that that's the case. I mean, we're literally spraying a chemical onto our food.
It's funny you should say that, but when you look at these fields being sprayed, you think, how could this become the norm that we are spraying poisons on all the food we eat multiple times? I mean, how, if you told the story of that in a children's storybook, they go, wow, did that really happen?
In fact, evidence suggests you would have to eat 5 apples today compared to 1 apple 50 years ago to get the same nutritional benefits.
I know you mentioned in your book that scientists have found a correlation between the use of glyphosate and the increase in IBS. Is that, do you think, to do with the bacteria, the change of bacteria?
I do. Yes, I think what happens is because these beneficial bacteria are being depleted, and because the pathogens have an edge because they're not as sensitive, they tend to proliferate. And there's other reasons too, because everything's getting messed up very badly. One of the things that I suspect, and I see, it's been shown that glyphosate increases the pH of the gut, which is the acid base.
Fred Price is one farmer who has switched from industrial farming to focus on agroecology and regenerative farming.
Ten years ago, when I was farming with synthetics, every interaction I made, every intervention was a negative one, trying to kill this weed, prevent that pest. Farming like this, every interaction you have with the soil, with the land, with your crops, with your stock, is a positive one. Effectively, characteristics that in a modern farming system would be discarded because they compromise yield, but in an organic farming system are incredibly valuable resources. Because a modern field of wheat, every single grain is genetically identical to the next one. The whole premise of nature is resilience, right? The whole premise of industrial farming is boom or bust. So for me, it's less about the cost of food, it's about realizing the true cost of the way we were growing before, but also appreciating that there's a different kind of way of doing food and appreciating the value within that. Big food systems, efficiency means machine tools, production lines, robots, factories. In small food systems, efficiencies of productivity come from like closing those random loops. Like, for example, me taking the wheat feed back from a mill to feed to the pigs. And that kind of like loop just couldn't happen in a big system.
Regenerative farming also involves allowing animals to graze freely. This helps improve the soil structure and therefore the quality of our food. I would like to know why going vegan might not necessarily be the best for the environment and our health.
All of us need to differentiate between the livestock systems which are part of the problem, and that's intensive poultry, it's intensive pork. All those systems should be banned. And critically, the livestock products and systems which are part of the solution. And by that I mean that if we were to return, it would be a return to systems of production which work in harmony with nature, which build soil fertility with a crop rotation which includes clover and grass, which can then coexist with a lot of biodiversity. The only way we can turn that pasture into food that we can eat is graze it with ruminant animals. That means animals that have a rumen, which is the capacity in their stomachs to digest the grass that they eat.
So they're growing naturally, they're taught how to graze, they're eating grass, which is cows. Cows are designed to eat grass. They're not designed to eat cereals and other high starch diets. You wouldn't see them go run into a maize field and eat maize, for instance.
In terms of our gut health, what most of the experts are pointing towards is that it is more about the quality of our meat rather than necessarily giving it up altogether.
It's about a balance between the amount of meat you're eating and the quality. And most of the health studies have shown that it is the processed meats, the low quality meats in ready foods and ultra processed food that is the most harmful for your heart and for giving you cancer.
The system of pricing of food and farming products is dishonest because it doesn't include the financial calculation relating to the damaging consequences of farming practices, say to climate change or to water pollution or to human health, all of which we are paying for in hidden ways. For every pound that we spend in the supermarket on food, there's another hidden pound split 50-50 between damage to the environment and damage to public health, which doesn't appear on the price ticket.
We need to embed the human element into our food systems. It's become too big and too commoditized. And it's absolutely critical that we do that, because otherwise there's a limit to how kind of footloose you can be as a grower if you don't control your price. You know, the commodity system is unable to encapsulate values like ecology and biodiversity.
How weird that if you farm in a way that damages public health, it pays better than beneficial farming. So why is that?
I think that successive governments, it's not just the current government, have become convinced that cheap food is politically important to give the masses food, which seems to be incredibly affordable. So whether it's the cheap Tesco chicken, £2.50 or £3 or whatever it is today, or a whole range of other, mostly highly processed foods. They become convinced that if they took any actions which would have the consequence of increasing food prices, that would play badly against them at the next election. And since the primary purpose of most politicians is to get re-elected, it hasn't been politically attractive to introduce the polluter pays principle into agriculture.
The agriculture bill has brought in a new way of supporting farmers to farm with nature and the climate in mind, but the risk is that that reward will not counter the pressures still from the market, from trade deals with countries like the United States and Australia, which might push down further the price that they're being paid for food. So we need to have a vision for how we're helping farmers move to more regenerative, agroecological farming, and a set of policies from government, including trade policy as well as farm support, that allows them to do so.
There hasn't been the public pressure, which actually is the only thing that in the end will change politicians' mind, to introduce the right food, which makes you healthy, affordable, and the wrong food, expensive, which it absolutely is, because it's of course costing not only our health, but the health of the planet.
This focus on the farming side as the problem, it's actually the easy part, is the biological journey. The difficult part is the social part, and totally turning our food system on its head.
You might almost say that we are part of a multi-generational feeding trial where we've industrialized agriculture and fed the products to not one but 2 or 3 generations of human beings and observed the consequences.
But for as long as we are content to let ultra-processed food fill our shopping baskets, then fundamentally farming will be about supplying very cheaply those commodity crops in a very unsustainable way.
Now, more than half of everything we eat in the UK is what scientists call ultra-processed food, and now new research suggests this could cause as much harm as smoking.
We've got a system that is absolutely designed around stacking it high, selling it cheap, and not worrying so much about the quality.
If you just look around the supermarkets, it's packed with ultra-processed food. Is this even real food?
Do you think that the quality of our food is getting worse?
On average, yes. Over 50% of our calories are now from ultra-processed or junk food.
And it's actually ultra-processed foods, in my view, are probably one of the biggest risk factors for the development of IBS.
The level of processing we're seeing in ultra-processed food, which means that there's no real food in there, there's no nutritional value.
Evidence suggests that ultra-processed food and sugar has a very negative effect on the balance of good and bad bacteria in our gut. And that in itself could be another reason that leads to chronic disease developing.
Georgina Hold, a professor of the gut microbiology, believes that the Western diet is really impacting our microbiome.
There will be microbes that can use that preferentially over others. And what happens is that the bacteria that we probably that are not such good guys are able to utilize that more preferentially than the guys that we really need, who are our kind of ancestral good guys that break down our fibers and all that kind of thing, that we need from that nutritional perspective. So you get blooms of bacteria that you don't necessarily want there.
It is her duty to be sure that what she has to spend buys the most in healthful, nutritious food for her family. Henry knows he ought to have some vegetables, good diet, and all that, you know. What's this? Henry's never seen anything like this before. Looks good, so he'll take 2.
Is it that the further we come from fresh, natural food, the more ill we're getting?
When we take natural foods and start processing them and changing them, we change their biochemical structure. We change their energetics. We change everything. It is not a natural food anymore, and it becomes unsuitable for feeding your body. Food in the Western world in particular has been degraded. It's moved very far away from what Mother Nature intended for us. The major reason for that is commercial, of course. Everything you buy in a supermarket is full of chemicals.
So if you're going to put food that our ancestors couldn't eat, there's a very good chance that you're going to have digestive issues. But basically, if it comes out of a packet or it's come out of a factory, it's going to be very difficult for you to digest in the same way.
The food that we are eating has changed dramatically, so we really are living on much more processed food these days compared to times in the past when we ate much more home-cooked, freshly prepared foods based on whole natural ingredients. We have a real culture of snacking, and part of the problem is that is simply not the way our digestive system is designed to work. Our Paleolithic ancestors would have had periods of time where they did have food and then periods of time where they didn't. And so our digestive system is designed to eat and then have periods of time when it's resting. Whereas these days, that certainly isn't the case with this snacking culture that we have.
Iyako aye ngokude aka aya gija akagweko na mama na aya gija ne hako aye alafu abelele monola hako ndobogo to afimaki.
This one they use for hunting. They are just some little bit bigger animals.
I spent time with the Hadza in Tanzania, who are the last hunter-gatherers in East Africa. They've been there for about 10,000 years. They don't really cook, they don't have a refrigerator, and they don't really store food either. So every day they get up and pick a few berries or get some baobab for porridge. It's been worked out that they have the healthiest gut microbes on the planet. They have twice as many species as we do, and they don't die from any chronic diseases. The key to their diet seems to be masses of fiber and diversity of both plants and animals, and a total lack of processed foods and chemicals.
We've made massive changes to what we've done over the last couple of 100 years, and our genetics has not had time to evolve and adjust to this nutritional insult that we've put it through, and this kind of lifestyle insult by becoming sedentary, by making this high caloric intake, low fiber, low fruits, low vegetables, high fat, high refined sugars. And we're just kind of expecting our body or our genetics to deal with this.
Mindful process is that if you're having too much of something.
Absolutely. So I've got a friend who's a nutritionist, and he says that you wouldn't drink 2 bottles of wine, wake up with a hangover and say, oh, I'm allergic to alcohol. But we do that with gluten. We eat it for 3 meals a day, every day. And then because our body's reacting to it, we think we've got a problem with it.
I decided to look into the epidemiology of these gut issues. Why is it that the UK has one of the highest prevalences of IBS? France, for instance, has an estimated IBS rate of 4%, the UK 21%. Interestingly, France consumes on average 10% ultra-processed food, whereas Britain consumes 50%.
But in the UK, we haven't acknowledged ultra-processed food as a problem for our health, whereas in France, they have, despite a much lower starting point, set a target to reduce ultra-processed food in their diets by 20% over the next 3 years. And Canada as well, Brazil, have set dietary guidelines that really emphasize the need to reduce ultra-processed foods.
Soft bluebonnet margarine, soft enough to spread on a potato chip. And Bluebonnet did it to demonstrate a great new margarine discovery.
France, for example, didn't switch to margarine. They knew they had a tradition of eating butter and they kept at it, whereas the marketing here was much more effective in doing that and persuaded doctors more easily to persuade people to switch to some of these unhealthy choices.
It might also have something to do with the amount of sugar that we're consuming.
So for many years, I've been campaigning to try and raise awareness of the harms of excess sugar consumption, which in the UK now is around 2 to 3 times a limit recommended by the World Health Organization. But most of our sugar consumption comes from ultra-processed food. It doesn't come from what people are adding in to, say, for example, tea or coffee or into their cereal. It's actually already hidden in the food that we're consuming. And that's why we need the government to intervene to ensure that the food industry are not allowed to deceive the public with all the hidden sugars they're putting in foods. Sugar has absolutely no nutritional value. At the very least, it's unnecessary calories. At worst, it contributes to many chronic diseases when consumed in excess.
There is a lot of hidden sugar. There's a lot of hidden ingredients. Do you understand E numbers? Do you understand some of the wonderful chemical descriptions that you have on the ingredients in food? I certainly don't, and I'm quite well associated with the food sector.
It seems to me that this is all blindingly obvious, that the food in our supermarkets can't possibly be benefiting our gut. But if we know all of this, why are most of our supermarkets packed with it? Why are we acting so slowly?
The food industry are at the table in so many of these policy debates about the future of food and public health, and they tend to push reformulation of processed food as the solution. So to focus on fat, salt, sugar, the components of food, rather than on the whole food or the level of processing of that food. And the reason is that as the food industry, they can respond by tweaking this nutrient or that level of fat or salt and still package it and market it in the way they've always done.
Did you know the last time you starved yourself to lose fat, you might have lost muscle? Why? You didn't eat enough protein. Protein helps you keep the muscle while you lose fat. And that's what's special about Kellogg's Special K. It has the highest level of dietary protein of any cereal. So the under 200 calorie Special K breakfast may help you get the fat off and keep the muscle on. Special K. Keep the muscle, lose the fat.
The reason that actually the food industry are able to get away with this, the fact that ultra-processed food is so prevalent and so heavily marketed, is because they have a lot of financial power and influence to the point that they are able to even influence the dietary guidelines and inhibit regulations that would help protect the public and the most vulnerable members of society from their excesses and manipulations.
Tactics were very similar to those used by the tobacco companies in terms of steering the agenda so that their most profitable products wouldn't be hit by adverse publicity or politicians passing rules or laws or changing taxes.
I'm just producing a documentary about deteriorating gut health in the UK, and I was just wondering if I could possibly speak to a member of your team about how you source your food product.
Yeah, no worries. So if you wouldn't mind just sending this request to our press inbox, which is Nestle UK.
So I've already actually sent an email.
Okay, I mean, look, to be honest, it's a bit of a sort of a sprawling subject, and I don't know if we've got anyone we've put up for interview on it.
I once found a cottage pie in one of our leading retailers. In 2005 was £1. Fantastic value. Today, 15 years later, it's still £1, the same product. And with inflation, what is in that product, because it's not the same as what was in 2005, in many ways we have become both a culture but a food system that's obsessed with the price point rather than the quality of the food.
Why do you think government isn't targeting it as much as they could be? Is it because they are scared of the big food companies? Is it because they have too much control?
Yeah, I think they're being lobbied. Food companies have got such a position of power politically that they can control MPs to change the agenda. And it's similar to this whole debate about sugar, that sugar is, half the price it was 10 years ago because of subsidies and European subsidies and UK subsidies. And so on the one hand, we're saying we're giving a sugar tax and you shouldn't do it, but economically, we are still supporting this. It's a bit like encouraging petrol whilst we're sort of saying we're going to go green. We haven't linked up the health side of our government with the economics.
So the food system is broken because it's not fit for purpose in serving the health of the population, and unhealthy food is given the spotlight, and government policy has been proposed again and again over many, many years to try and rebalance things so that what is in the spotlight is the healthier option. What's easier for people, what's more affordable, accessible, convenient, you name it, is the healthy option, and yet we're still not actually seeing that happen. Anyone who's familiar with going to, supermarket will know that this is very typical to find, but you'll find share bags. So that might be an industry's way of getting over the portion size, because they can say, well, technically we've put share on the packet, so of course this is for sharing, even if their data ends up showing that people don't share and they actually consume the whole packet themselves. That's the kind of unintended consequence that could come as a result of a policy that's designed to decrease consumption, when actually it could lead to a situation where it increases consumption. So it's all good and well having government policies proposed, but if they're unlikely to actually be implemented, let alone evaluated and monitored, then we're not likely to see the outcomes that we want in regards to population health.
Would you say that the food industry has increased the gut issues in this country?
Without doubt, yes. I mean, they provide, top, 12 companies provide about 70% of our food. So they are largely responsible for what at least half the UK eat. And definitely the quality of our diets has gone down, although, as we discussed economically, the price of food has also come down relative to what everyone is earning. We just go from one problem really to another, and they've done a brilliant job there, I must say, both in getting food cheaper, which in the 1970s actually saved a lot of starvation and things, but nowadays I think we need to acknowledge that it is killing us, and we need to change the way we make food.
I mean, I think government has a crucial role, both at the production side, at the farmers' side, right the way through the supply chain. We have the sugar tax, which has absolutely driven a new behaviour by the food sector. It's really important to look at the quality and food standards generally, and start to look at food standards being as much about nutritional values as it is about food safety.
And the government has tended to focus on trying to get people to change their own behaviour without shaping the wider environmental, socioeconomic determinants that influence people's food choices.
I must have had it now for about 8 or 9 years. It made me feel sluggish. I was obviously really self-conscious of my skin. So I think ultimately it just makes you feel, really self-conscious, really worried about how you look. And then on top of that, you're not feeling great. So I've definitely changed my diet. I think I'm ultimately more aware of what I eat just generally, but I didn't used to think about it at all. And then it switched really at the end of university. Since then, I think I'm definitely more aware of the stuff I put in my body.
We don't have a strong food culture. We don't have the Mediterranean respect for the grandmother who taught all the grandkids how to make these traditional dishes. We don't have a culture at school teaching people about food.
Unless you can cook, you're at the mercy of other people for what you eat. Either you have to buy it, or ready-made, or somebody else does it for you, or you go out, eat out in a restaurant. It's always more expensive, rarely as nutritious or delicious as something you can do yourself. And when you think of how important food is to our well-being and everything, it's incredible that it's so low down the list of priorities for so many people. A lot of people, when they go shopping or whatever, the only thing that's important is how cheap it is. Now, I know there are some people who don't have the luxury of thinking a different way, but everybody deserves healthy, wholesome food and needs it, really.
Where did you learn to cook?
Well, almost everywhere, because my grandparents had a restaurant, and then I used to go to this restaurant just looking at what they were doing. Then I had a very quite different working experience. I worked in an office for 35 years.
Oh, wow.
When I left the office, I went to school, cooking school.
Do you think all Italians know how to cook?
Not all, not everyone, but I think especially men nowadays are eager to learn how to cook well and healthy.
Do Italian people snack?
No snack, no. When they have an aperitif, they eat something, but not between lunch and dinner, no. They do respect the season for fruit, Yeah, we have our own garden. Now it's almost over. These are the very last tomatoes, but we had peppers, aubergines, green beans, and now it's over.
has to happen is people need to look at food in a completely different way. If you think if food is just a fuel to get you to the next meal, then you're going to go and buy the cheapest you can. People will spend more time looking at buying a car than where their food comes from, or looking for a build. All the things in life, our emphasis has changed away from our health because we think the NHS is going to pick up our health issues, and that's not the way it should be. Right? Food security and the quality of food is our every single individual's responsibility. And if you're just going to look for cheap food because supermarkets say you have your weekly shop at £3 cheaper, it's cheap for a reason.
And there's lots of research, pardon me, to show that the less you spend on food, real food, the more you spend on meds. It literally goes like that.
I think there's no doubt that in the end most of us can afford to spend more on our food. It's just that we've prioritised other things such as foreign holidays or iPhones or indeed actually kitting out our houses. I think housing costs have gone up dramatically in the last few decades, and of course that is partly out of people's control. If the cost of buying a house or renting a house now occupies a greater percentage of people's disposable income, that's something that has to be factored in.
What's happened? We've let several generations of children out of our homes and out of our schools without the basic skills they need to feed themselves properly, playing right into the hands of the multinational food companies. The more de-skilled we become, the better they like it, basically. So if you can't cook, you're at the mercy of other people for the most important thing, for your nutrition, to keep you healthy and to give you energy, vitality, the ability to concentrate. And if you can cook, you'll never be short of friends.
Just the other day, I had a roast grouse and some Welsh rarebit, and I ate the two together, and I suddenly realised I was onto something. So I'm kind of practicing a recipe of grouse and Welsh rarebit. It was the link between food and the outdoors, which was so key to me becoming a cook. My dad knew lots about the countryside. He was forever putting mushrooms in his pockets and making us rosehip cough syrup and stuff. So very quickly, as a kid who bit everything, that's how I understood everything, I began to view the world as edible or inedible from a very young age. In fact, now I even view people like that. The idea of sitting around a table, eating together, actually eating properly. You know, people are far more concerned about, you know, whether their Instagram appearance is going according to plan or what they're going to buy next or going somewhere than they are about food. And I think that knowing about food and where it comes from and what to do with it brings everything back from this world where food's gone wrong. It's the first thing we talk about when we haven't got it, but when there's lots of it, you know, the mind's wandering off in all sorts of other directions.
So why should we prioritise local food chains?
Local's really important to kind of re-engage with what's around and an idea of sharing and an idea of how much there is and how to use it properly. We don't understand actually the rhythms of the wild, you know, the wild world around us, the wildlife that actually gives us our food. So we're so out of touch with nature. And if you're out of touch with nature, you're out of touch with food.
There are lots of very good reasons for eating local, as much local food as possible. And many people now eat absolutely no local food. Local food carries, and this is well scientifically proven, the antibodies of the area. So basically people who have hay fever, or if they can get really local honey, that oftentimes it actually cures it completely. Also, so years ago people would have eaten, well, you know, the milk and eggs and, you know, maybe the beef and potatoes and things like that would all have come from the local area. Nowadays, food comes from all over the world with a whole lot of bacteria and microbes and all sorts of things on it that our systems in this part of the world were never used to coping with. And it has to be linked with the extraordinary rise in allergies and intolerances and so on as well.
I think we know less about food than we ever have, actually. For all the cookery books, for all the television, I think we're really out of tune. I don't think we cook. I mean, if you look at ready meals alone, you know, they're skyrocketing year on year. in popularity. So I think we're really out of kilter with listening to our bodies. We don't use our senses anymore. Stuff goes in the bin because it looks wrinkly, and those carrots are actually bloody delicious. If you just rinse that bit of meat, it's all right. Take the packaging off. The packaging's made it all horrible anyway. Give it, but we don't use it. Even listening to your ears, things fizzing, whatever the case may be. We don't use our senses, our smell. Everything's gross, and we've got very squeamish. This kind of, if anything looks like an animal, fine, be vegetarian. But surely it's not that shocking that it actually, it's all got to be portioned and so there's a real practicality that's disappeared. We're not practical with food. We become incredibly squeamish, and we don't actually know what to do with it.
And it's really important to relearn the forgotten skill of recognizing foods in the wild right through the seasons. And why they're extra important is because basically all those wild foods have all the vitamins, minerals, trace elements intact. So they haven't been in any way manipulated to produce the maximum amount of food at the minimum cost. So they're really, really important. And most people don't have any of those in their diet. The other thing, of course, is fermented foods and all of that.
What do you think that the British public are lacking in their diet?
I think they're lacking education. So I think we've come such a far away from food. We've come a long way. I think our link with the natural world, we're an urban society. It was a long time ago that we had to know where the fishes ran and where certain things grew in our locality. It's not that place anymore. You can have anything whenever you want it, and it's done for you. You don't have to interact with you. You just take the top off and you're ready to go. I think, losing a language with food has come at a great detriment. Food isn't this place where we gather and share with each other anymore. It's this it's almost inconvenient. People talk about inconvenience food because of the kind of inconvenient eating.
If we can get food back as top of the agenda for education, then there's a chance that kids will teach their parents, and then it will catch on as a ground-up movement. And I think a lot of these new technologies, like the company Zoe I'm working with on personalized nutrition, people start to test their gut microbes. They start to really make the link between what they put in their mouth and what's going on inside their bodies. I think that can be a very powerful movement.
There's so many ways to have sugar. We're grazing all the time. There's constantly food around us.
All of these trillions of bacteria and microbes in our gut, and they're everywhere. They're all over everything, in the air, on surfaces, in the water, on land, everywhere. They have all coexisted and co-developed with us as humans for millions and millions of years. We need to feed them in our gut. And I often think that, every time I'm going to eat something, that I think of down here in my gut, there are all these little microbes and things looking up and thinking, I wonder if there's something coming down from me this time.
I think we have an uphill struggle, but it's all about education. I think get people excited about food, get people excited about gut microbes, what's going on inside them, and there's definitely a chance this movement can take off.
And I think, where I see community farms, land share, and things like that going on, it's greatly heartening to see that the other systems will emerge, because we are at this extraordinary kind of volatile point at the moment, where which kind of life do you want to lead? It's all coming to a head.